Hello everybody, welcome to today's video looking at what 2018 teaches us about 2019 onwards in relation to AQA English Language Paper 1 for the GCSE exams. Now let me just say, last year I made a video series where I went through the 2017 examiners reports and I said, here's the advice that we've learned from these reports. Now those videos are still really important, and what I'm not going to do is repeat myself in this video. So I'm making one video here going over some of the key things that came out of the 2018 examiners reports. But what I want you to do is make sure you watch the other ones that I made on 2017, because those points still stand and I'm not going to repeat myself. What I'm also not going to do is show you the 2018 papers, because you might be studying them for a mock and it wouldn't be fair to show you the paper you're going to have in a mock. So any examples that I'm going to give, even though these examples come from the 2018 exams, I'm going to explain them in relation to the mock papers that are in my GCSE English Language Guide. Now that guide is available in paperback on Amazon for £6.99, so pick up a copy and you'll see the paper and the specific examples. So the first question to talk about is question 1, the exam board's easy opener, a 4-mark question. Looks something like this. You're given a direction to a part of the text, and then you have to list 4 things you learn about a certain topic. And it is a 4-mark question, 1 mark for every correct answer you give. Now, 2 things came out of the examiner's report for this question, and I'll talk about them both at the same time. The 2 things were to not overcomplicate the question and to begin your selection with the wording of the question. So the first thing to talk about is that this is a very simple question, a question where you can just retrieve information. It really addresses the first part of assessment objective 1 to identify explicit information, in other words, obvious information. And what some students do is they try to, as the examiner's report put it, overcomplicate, and they try to interpret information. They try to infer answers, and you just don't need to on this easy question. So don't overcomplicate it. Just pick 4 very, very simple, obvious points that answer the question, and you'll get your 4 marks. There are no more marks awarded for a more complex answer, as it were. And begin your selection with the wording of the question. This was pointed out in the examiner's report that many began their selection with the actual wording of the question, which helped to ensure you had that correct focus, because of course it's the first question in the exam. It's easy to panic and go slightly off topic. So if we look at the example from my revision guide, list 4 things from this part of the text about Frankenstein's creature, then using the wording you would say the creature is or the creature has on each of the points to make sure you're definitely answering on the right topic, and then just picking out 4 obvious things. So where it says, for example, his yellow skin scarcely covered the work of muscles and arteries beneath, then the creature has yellow skin would be an absolutely fine answer there. Where it says his shriveled complexion and straight black lips, the creature has black lips or straight black lips. Just taking obvious points. Now this might sound too simple, and in some ways it is very simple, but let me just tell you, do not underestimate how easy it is to make mistakes early in an exam where you're panicking and you've not yet settled in. So that's question 1. Question 2 is the language analysis question, an 8-mark question where you're given a small section of the text and asked to analyse how the language is used. And I will say as well, in my English language playlist, I have lots of videos on how to answer these questions. That's not what this video is about. This video is just about what did the 2018 summer paper teach us in the examiner's report as a result of that paper, talking to examiners and students and looking at past papers and the examiner's report and the mark scheme and the paper itself. What did we learn that perhaps we didn't know before? So for question 2, a few things came out. Writing a lot about a little, analysing effects, not just feature spotting, and avoiding vague and generalised effects. So I'll go through all of those now with you and what they mean. So the analysing a lot about a little is quite interesting, because what happens when you're looking at a text that is rich in language is it is easy to choose an extensive part of the text and to think, I'll write about this lengthy example. And when you write about an extensive part of the text, it's very easy to lead to just a very generalized comment attempting to explain the collective effect of everything together. So if I give you an example, and again this is in the revision guide, you guys know I like to mention the revision guide. If you say, okay, let's have a look at this. How does the writer use language to describe the weather is the question, and we've got this quotation: the rain pattered dismally against the panes and my candle was nearly burnt out. Now if you think, right, I'll write about that quotation, that's actually a very big quotation. There's lots and lots of different things going on there. There's the word pattered, which is perhaps an example of onomatopoeia. There's the word dismally, which, as we all know, comes from the Latin dies mali, meaning evil days. There's the light imagery of the candle burning out and the sort of image of darkness, which we associate with fear and horror and that kind of thing. Lots and lots of things going on. Now, the advice would be, don't write about all of that together in one kind of paragraph, because you won't do justice to the various different points you could write about. So that was that first point. To write a lot about a little, you might say, okay, I'm just going to write about the word pattered. Okay, and that's going to help me to really focus in my analysis on the effect of this word, rather than write about a large quotation, because in the 2018 exam, that's what happened. The selection of very lengthy examples led to paraphrasing and discussion of ideas rather than analysis of language. So choosing short quotations, maybe single word, it might be a phrase, but certainly not kind of long sentences will help. What else do we have here, though? Analysing the effect, not just feature spotting. Now, in 2018, to be fair, people did better than in 2017 on this, but there are no marks awarded for just saying, oh, here's some onomatopoeia, and just giving a kind of spotting the features. There's some pathetic fallacy. There's a metaphor. There's onomatopoeia. That's not what this question is about. This question is driven by the effect that you have. You are rewarded for the quality of your analysis, not the number of features you can identify. Okay, now that leads into the third bullet point, avoiding vague and generalized effects, because you might find the rain pattered dismally against the panes, and you might say, okay, that is an example of onomatopoeia. I'll say, the writer uses language to describe the weather using the onomatopoeia of pattered to describe how the rain is hitting the windows. And then you've got to explain the effect. And if you just offer a vague and generalized effect, and this is the same in question 3, as we'll see. If you say something like, this makes the reader want to read on, or it creates a picture in our heads, or it's very powerful, you'll get very few marks. You've got to be specific on the effect, in this case of the onomatopoeia. So you might say, the onomatopoeia helps the reader to imagine that they are actually in this situation themselves. It's as if they can hear the noise of the rain themselves. The vivid auditory description makes them feel as if they're there themselves, and heightens the suspense and tension as they themselves then begin to feel just like the narrator, Dr. Frankenstein, is, or something like that. Something more specific than just finding something and then just giving a vague and generalized effect. Now, the issue is, what if you find something like the onomatopoeia here, but you think, you know what, I don't know the effect. I can't give an effect beyond, it draws us in. Well, then don't write about it. Choose something that you can explain the specific effect of, and look at my video, More Help with Paper 1 Question 2, for advice on how to do that. Question 3 is the structure analysis question. How is the writer use structure to interest the reader? 8 marks, so again, only something like a 10-minute question. And some interesting things came out of this year's paper for this question. The first one was, don't retell the plot. So a lot of students narrated a lot of the story, and some of that comes from the bullet points saying, what happens at the beginning, how does this change, and how does it end, and that kind of thing. And students would just actually say, well, at the beginning we read this, and then in the middle it turns to this, and at the end it turns to this, and just kind of retell the story. It's not about how, what is the plot and how does the plot progress. It is, Well, what are the effects of the writer's choices of structural choices? Explaining the effects of structural features is another key thing here without giving those generic effects. If it draws the reader in, it makes you want to read on. And if we look at, in my revision guide, the example, there's a flashback. Now, if you just say, oh, here's a structural feature, a flashback, you've got to think about what is the specific effect of that flashback. Could it be that it creates tension as it's a digression from the main plot about the creature, and the reader just wants to know what's going on with the creature, whilst the narrator has a flashback? It creates that tension, and in fact causes the reader to imagine in their mind what might be going on. Could it be that the flashback gives crucial information to help us understand the character and their choices, and therefore, is essential for character development and characterization? Whatever it is, it's not enough to just find something, and you'll see this pattern emerging through the paper. It's not enough to just find different language features for question 2, structural features for question 3. You've got to be able to explain very precisely and very specifically the effects that they have. Question 4 then is this question where you're given an opinion and you're asked to what extent you agree, and a 20-mark question. So of course this is worth half the marks in section A. It's a much longer question. You're writing for 25 minutes or so, and just finding the points you're going to use in your answer will take a while. A few things to point out here. It was made very clear you can agree, disagree, or partially agree with the statement which is given. There are no right or wrong approaches to this. You might completely agree, completely disagree. You might agree with some aspects and disagree with others. All evaluations and interpretations are valid as long as they are rooted in the source, and that's really important. So the question, and I did talk about this in a few videos just before the exam, the question is not so much about do you agree or disagree or partially agree with the statement. It's actually all hinging on this second bullet point, how the writers created these impressions. The word how is so important in this question, and the how of this question is about not just evaluating the ideas in the text, but the methods that are used to present those ideas. And there has been some confusion with this question. What do we write about in question 4? Well, if you look at the mark schemes for all of the past papers and sample papers, you can write about anything as long as it informs your answer. So you can write about language and sentence length, structure, tone, narrative perspective, themes, verb tense, color imagery, juxtaposition, all of these kinds of things, if it informs your answer. So the example from my revision guide is the writer makes it feel as if you're inside the room with Dr. Frankenstein, experiencing everything he's experiencing. To what extent do you agree? In your response, you could write about your impression of Dr. Frankenstein and how the writers created these impressions. Back up your answers with quotations from the text. So if you agree, yes, the writer does make it feel like you're inside the room with Dr. Frankenstein. And then you would ask yourself, what are the methods used to make you feel like you're there? So if it is language or structure or tone or symbolism or metaphor or sentence length, whatever it is, if those are the things that are making you feel like you're in the room with Dr. Frankenstein, then you can write about them. There's no kind of thing you cannot use as a method here, even though this isn't a question that is analysing specifically the AO2 analysis of language. It is still possible to write about those things if it is relevant to your answer. And finally, question 5, a few things that came out with question 5. Again, the exam board are not keen on formulaic approaches being taught on how to answer question 5. It is the creative writing question. They want you to be creative. They want you to be inventive. They want you to express your individuality in this question. So I guess one of the overall things is, if you are a writer who is confident enough that you can be creative and just get on with it, then get on with it. Of course, a lot of students, I know a lot of students I work with, feel that they couldn't possibly answer a question like this if they didn't have some kind of at least starting point in terms of that formulaic approach. So it's a balancing act with a lot of things in your exams. If the focus is on being creative and inventive, just like in paper 2 question 5, then avoiding a formulaic approach is great if you can do it. Okay, so planning your answer. There was evidence that the answer was planned more this year, and that's great. The key thing here, I guess, is this one question is worth half the marks in the entire paper. So if it's worth half the marks in the entire paper, it's worth putting that bit of extra effort into and including a plan. Okay, don't fake impressive vocabulary. Now, what do I mean by this? So that's my own paraphrase, but what I mean is essentially this, that a lot of students try to include overambitious vocabulary and actually misused it. So what am I trying to say? Let's say you write a story and the vocabulary is quite basic. You might think, I'm going to learn 5 really impressive words, really sophisticated words, and put them into my answer, whatever it is. Well, what the examiner's report pointed out is students who seem to do that kind of thing often struggled. So what you've got to try and do is improve your vocabulary and not fake an impressive vocabulary, but have an impressive vocabulary. Now, how do you do that? Well, one of the ways you'll improve your vocabulary is through reading. It's through reading works of fiction and non-fiction that are written, in a sophisticated way. Perhaps, go to your school library and say, can you recommend a book that will improve my vocabulary? Now, of course, I'm making this video in September, so you've got plenty of time to start reading, so that by the time you get to the summer, your natural, actual, genuine vocabulary is more impressive, rather than you trying to just improve a couple of words. In terms of technical accuracy, we saw 3 things: comma splicing, punctuation of dialogue, and apostrophes incorrect. Now, comma splicing is where a comma is used to divide 2 complete sentences, and that is something I see in probably 90% of students' work. It's something like deep down you can tell some punctuation is needed, but you can't quite work out what it is. Now, a comma does a lot of different things, and I'm going to put 3 videos in the description, one on commas, one on punctuation of dialogue, one on apostrophes, or 2 on apostrophes, because I actually have 2 on apostrophes. A comma has a lot of uses, but the use of a comma is never to divide complete sentences. That's a full stop normally, occasionally a semicolon if the 2 sentences are about the same topic, but you wouldn't want to use too many semicolons. So never using a comma to divide complete sentences. Punctuation of dialogue, of course, if you're writing a narrative, but even a descriptive piece and putting dialogue in, many people struggle to punctuate it correctly. And I actually think punctuation of dialogue is pretty tricky. I mean, it's not like there's just one rule. There's a great section on this in Mr. Bruff's Guide to Grammar. Check that out. And apostrophes, apostrophes, I think, are one of the first things examiners see mistakes with. It just jumps off the page. The rules of apostrophes are fairly simple, but I think the issue is that a lot of students see a word ending in S, plural, and they think, oh, I need an apostrophe. So make sure you watch those videos linked in the description if you're not sure about those. So I hope you found this useful. Let me just remind you that the examples that I went through in this video are from my revision guide. They're not the actual 2018 paper, because you'll probably have that for a mock, many of you. So I don't want to sort of give away what that paper was, but do pick up my revision guide. £6.99 paperback on Amazon, £3.99 ebook at mrbruff.com, £3.99 Kindle edition on Amazon, and thank you for watching.